This video is sponsored by ToneGym. Most songs are built from sets of 4 bars. Grouping your song into 4-bar phrases and then stacking them up into 8, 16 or 32-bar sections is effectively the default approach to form in songs. But of course there are many songs built instead from 3-bar loops rather than 4 bars. For example, the chorus of Children of the Revolution by T-Rex is a 3-bar loop. As is the chorus of Bullet with Butterfly Wings by Smashing Pumpkins. Another song built on a 3-bar loop is Hey by Pixies. In a similar way to how we often treat 4/4 as the default time signature, it's not clear whether our preference for 4-bar loop length is some sort of natural affinity or something reinforced culturally, or just a bit of both really. But regardless of why we like it, because our ears are effectively primed to hear the music in groups of 4 bars, when it instead follows a 3-bar loop, it can catch our sense of timing off guard. It feels like the music is almost skipping a bar, creating a subtle jolt forward. It gives the music a sense of forward momentum and energy. The 3-bar loop at the centre of Tame Impala's Let It Happen is a big part of what gives this song its hypnotic, trance-inducing energy. The oddness of a 3-bar loop is most apparent when a song begins by using a more typical 4-bar phrase and then switches to using 3-bar phrases. For example, Duality by Slipknot begins with a verse section based on a 4-bar phrase, but then we hit the main riff, which is based on a 3-bar phrase. Boulevard of Broken Dreams by Green Day is largely built from typical 4-bar phrases. That is until we reach the climactic outro section, which instead is based on a 3-bar loop. A similar example is Redbone by Childish Gambino. Once again, the bulk of this song is based on a 4-bar loop, but the outro gives us this 3-bar loop. Although it would be more accurate to describe this loop not simply as a 3-bar loop, but instead as a 6-bar loop. As on every other rotation, this D minor chord here swaps for a D major chord. So to include the entire loop, we ultimately would have to call this a 6-bar loop. But the thing is, in the same way that songs based on a 4-bar phrase can often be best considered as 8-bar phrases or 16-bar phrases or any other multiple of 4, songs that use 3 bars as their basic unit of phrase length can be often better understood as using a 6-bar loop rather than just 3. For example, Videotape by Radiohead is based around this repeating 3-bar piano riff. However, on every other occasion, the piano riff is slightly altered. So to accommodate the entire phrase into the loop, we may want to label this as a 6-bar loop rather than just simply 3. Mystic Brew by Ronnie Foster is a similar example. Although 3 bars is the essential minimum phrase length going on here, most of the melodies, most of the phrases we actually get fit better into 6 bars. And of course, the same is true of the song that famously sampled Mystic Brew, Electric Relaxation by A Tribe Called Quest.
Check it out, you got me mesmerized. With your black hair and your fat ass style. Street poetry is my everyday. But yo, I gotta stop when you drop my weight. If I was working at the club, you would not pay. Hey yo, my man Fife Diggy, he got something to say. I like him brown, yellow, Puerto Rican, I hate.
Sometimes even the tempo at which we count the song can change whether we're talking about a 3-bar loop or a 6-bar loop. For example, I would consider the song Never As Tired As When I'm Waking Up by LCD Sound System to be based on a 3-bar loop at the tempo 63 BPM.
Wasted and complacent, and you're about the same, but still I wanna get.
However, if you instead considered the tempo to be double that, 126 BPM, you'd be looking at a 6-bar phrase instead. Ultimately though, it's just 2 sides of the same coin. A similar example actually is my song Blue, which could be considered a 3-bar loop at 64 BPM or a 6-bar loop at 128 BPM.
Making you so blue, all you've done is not had it like a song, with nothing to prove. I know that you are blue.
In a moment, we'll look at a song that's not only based on a 3-bar loop, but is also in an odd time signature. But before that, I want to talk about one of the most important aspects of your music theory understanding, and that's your ears, your ear training. Your ability to use your ears to identify things about music is the most important skill when it comes to music theory and actually using music theory. And a great way to develop your ear training is with ToneGym. ToneGym offers a whole range of ear training games to improve your listening skills. For example, their game Route 6 plays you a short chord progression and you have to identify what those chords are by ear. Or you could play their game Chordless, which instead focuses on chord type. So you have to identify whether the chord is major or minor or diminished, etc. Use the link in the description to start improving your ear today with ToneGym. The feeling of uneven phrase lengths in a song is sort of like a watered down version of the feeling we get when a song uses an odd time signature or a mixed meter. When a bar of music has more or less beats in it than we were expecting, it has an off, unusual sound to it, because our sense of timing and meter gets caught off guard by the unexpected deviation from the norm. For example, in the instrumental section of Heart of Glass by Blondie, at the end of each line, one beat of the bar is skipped off, resulting in a one-off bar of 3/4. In fact, some songs take advantage of both of these effects to create a truly unpredictable sense of meter. The intro riff of Times Like These by the Foo Fighters is not only based on a 3-bar loop, but it's also in 7/4 time, making Times Like These a very fitting title indeed. It Must Be Love by Labri Sifri also makes use of both of the techniques, the change in time signature and the change in phrase length. The main chorus hook here is a 3-bar loop.
It must be love, love, love. It must be love, love, love.
But then after we've heard that twice through, we then get a brief time signature change from 4/4 to 3/4, just for 2 bars, and then we switch back to 4/4.
Nothing more, nothing less, love is the best.
So here we're getting the subtle metric upset of hearing a 3-bar loop rather than 4 bars, and then following that straight away we get a more potent metric change where we completely change time signature just for 2 bars. A really interesting example of irregular phrase length is the intro to Ashes by David Bowie. The intro is based on a repeating 3-bar loop. However, the interesting bit is that we get this 3-bar loop 5 times, followed by 1 extra standalone bar, and then we enter the next section. Meaning in total, the intro is actually a very typical 16 bars long. But because those 16 bars are subdivided into these irregular phrase lengths, we still get that irregular phrase sound. Then during the outro of Ashes to Ashes, this 3-bar synth melody returns. This time, Bowie is singing over the top of it, but Bowie isn't singing a 3-bar phrase to match the 3-bar synth riff. Instead, he's singing a 4-bar phrase. And to add to the complexity, he doesn't even begin singing his 4-bar phrase when the 3-bar synth loop begins. So immediately we're launched into both of these phrases being out of phase with each other, out of sync. And as the outro goes on, the 2 phrases, the synth melody and Bowie's vocal melody, continue to go out of phase with each other, in a similar way to how a polymeter would work, but at a greater resolution. I personally love when songs use 3 bars as their minimum phrase length rather than 4 bars. It introduces such a subtle but refreshing change to the typical meter of music. Beyond my song Blue, which we saw earlier, I actually also used a 3-bar or 6-bar loop as the foundation of my song See You Again.
If I am
Much like we saw on songs like Redbone or Boulevard of Broken Dreams, I really think this slightly atypical use of timing lends a hypnotic sound that really pulls you in, because every time we hear that loop, it loops earlier than our internal sense of timing might be expecting, which grabs us again before our attention can float too far away. Let me know in the comments if you can think of any other songs that use a 3-bar or 6-bar loop.